This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
Good morning. You're listening to the Mac and Jack Sports Show on Northeast Streaming Sports.
And here we are. Welcome to Saturday. It is Saturday morning at 8 a.m. And what does that mean? That means it's time for the Mac and Jack Saturday Debate Show. I am Paul Semendinger, so it's the Mac, Jack, and Paul Saturday Debate Show. And usually Jamie Paggs sneaks in at some point and adds his wisdom and great insight into the program. But here we are, an hour of great sports talk and a new start for the program. Many of these Saturdays, we're going to begin by focusing and celebrating our nation's heroes, those people in the American Armed Forces, by having questions that tie in to the service of athletes. And we'll begin that today. So, hey, Mac. Hey, Jack. How you guys doing this morning?
Hey, good morning, fellas.
Good morning, Doc. Good morning, Jack.
So, during World War II, a lot of Major League Baseball players left the game, obviously, to fight in the war. And two of those biggest players, ones who are part of the Northeast streaming sports area, the Northeast, were the great Joe DiMaggio and the great Ted Williams. DiMaggio, of course, was a Yankee. Ted Williams, of course, was a Red Sox. And so the first debate question comes up here asking, what do you think, how would have those guys done for their career if they hadn't lost 3 full seasons to serving our country in World War II? What do you think?
Better numbers, but I don't think the legacy would have been affected much. But keep in mind, that's a 3-year layoff. And even though both men came back and had some big seasons, would those seasons following their 3-year layoff been even better had they not had the 3-year layoff? Because when an athlete's off that long, I mean, chances are he loses something, even though it might be slightly. I'm looking at DiMaggio's numbers. DiMaggio only played 13 years. I mean, that's a long time, but not as long as you'd think an all-time great should play. But it would have been a 16-year career, which would have been more in line with the majority of all-time greats. He had 2,214 hits. I estimate he would have averaged about 185 per season, looking at what he did before and looking at what he did a little after. So he would have finished with somewhere close to 2,800 hits. No, he wouldn't have stuck around for 3,000 because he hit 256s last year. DiMaggio was a guy who had a lot of pride and wasn't going to make himself look bad, okay? He wasn't going to hang around and be mediocre. He had 361 homers. I feel he would have hit about 30 a year. That would have been about his average looking at his numbers. If he had 90 more, that's 451. That's an awful lot of homers in that era. It's an awful lot today. But in that era, it was an awful lot. Remember, 500 homers automatically got just about anyone in the Hall of Fame. Not that DiMaggio needed it. And he would have, kind of been a little short of that. RBIs, he had 1,537. I estimate he would have finished with close to 2,000 RBIs. He would have knocked in about 125 a year the way he was doing. Let's keep in mind injuries, guys. We don't know for sure whether Ted Williams would have had to miss part of a season because of an injury. So then the numbers go down. As far as Ted Williams went, he had 2,654 hits. If you estimate about 185 a season, he would have cracked the 3,000 hit club, about 3,200 hits. That's a special club. He missed out on it, so be it. His homers, 521. I estimate he would have hit about 100 more over 3 seasons. He would have had 621, which would have looked even more impressive at the time. Eventually, he would have gotten caught by Willie Mays late on. RBIs, he had 1,839. He would have finished with over 2,000. about 2,200. He would have knocked in about 127 a season. In other words, the numbers would have looked better. But guys, let's be honest about it. It wouldn't have added to either guy's legacy of greatness. We wouldn't have thought any more of Joe DiMaggio, Ted Williams, had they just padded their numbers, because most people don't even remember their numbers. I remember the amount of homers each guy hit, maybe the batting average, but for the most part, you have to look it up and analyze it carefully. When we think of Ted Williams, we think about arguably the greatest pure hitter ever. Pure hitter ever. We think of Joe DiMaggio as arguably the greatest, all around player, perhaps, if we're not counting Babe Ruth's, pitching exploits.
Well, first, when as far as Ted Williams go, he left twice. He left during World War II, and he left during the Korean War. So he spent another 2 years in Korea. So you're going to have to add 2 more years to that, and whatever the home runs were, he could have easily got close to. I think he got close to maybe 550 to 580 home runs, a lot more hits in another 2 years. Maybe the Red Sox made another attempt at going to the World Series and winning the World Series. So I think Ted Williams was hurt even more than Joe DiMaggio was. And if you're that close to 3,000 hits, Jack, I don't care who you are. I think that if you're in your last year and you need another 100 hits or so to get to that point, you might end up playing, even if it's a DH rule, which I think they had the DH back then, if I'm not mistaken, during the 50s, Doc. But anyway, I think okay, all right. So maybe he plays first base and finishes out the year trying to hit that 30,000 hit. I think the most telling thing about these two guys was injury. These guys actually went and were willing to give up their lives for the country. They weren't drafted. They left, like a lot of people in World War II did, to go fight in a country so far away and come back and play at a high level again. I think, if I'm not mistaken, from what I was reading, Ted Williams came back and got the MVP that year he came back and played after World War II term, and he did the same thing again after Korea. So these guys were special guys. My grandfather was in the war. He came back. He was so messed up, he didn't know where he was at. Ted Williams was a fighter pilot. So that's what's extraordinary about these guys. How many of these new players could have went through what they went through and came back and played at that higher level? This is why I wanted to talk about this a little bit. They got PTSD. Back then it was called something else. I got a brain freeze right now. So to add to their legacy, I would think it would have added unbelievably if they didn't play. 2 years of your mind being messed up fighting in a war in a distant country, and then coming back and playing that way. If these guys played full out, I think they would have been, their legend would have even been more so, Jack.
You make a point that I overlooked with the Korean War. He played very little for those 2 seasons, even though he was active. And if I add on 50 homers, hypothetically, during those seasons he hardly played at all, that would have put him at 671. Does he hang around for Babe Ruth's record? Because he still had something in the tank when he retired. He wasn't the same player. But does he hang around, at 671 to get to 715? Okay, that's 29 and 15. That's 44 more homers. That's basically maybe 2 seasons he could have done it. That's interesting, whether he would have continued to play.
Right.
Here's an interesting thing. When he fought in Korea, Ted Williams, do you know who his wingman was?
No.
He was a jet pilot. You know who his wingman was? This will knock your socks off. John Glenn, the astronaut.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that something? How about that for a group of 2 guys who are pretty amazing?
Well, and his fishing partner, he liked that fly casting or whatever you call it. I don't know anything about fishing, but former world heavyweight champion Jack Sharkey was his partner. They would go out together fishing, He was from Massachusetts too.
Ted Williams was definitely both of them were, of course, but Ted Williams gave obviously more years of his career by serving in both of the wars. Former Yankee Jerry Coleman actually also, as a minor leaguer, fought in World War II, and then as a major leaguer, took time off to also be a combat pilot in the Korean War. Not as many major leaguers fought in Korea, but Ted Williams
Hall
did.
of Famer Jerry Coleman wound up in the Yankees second baseman for a while. He wound up in the Hall of Fame as a broadcaster. I mean,
Yes.
After working with the Yankees, he went to the Padres.
And was there for decades. Yeah, about 30 or 40 years, I think.
Would their legend have been bigger if they lost their lives during those wars?
Wow.
What do we want to think about that, Mac?
Well, I'm just saying. I mean, what's your opinion? I mean, you got two of the greatest ball players in the history of baseball, and they go there and they lose their lives. Do they become bigger stars because of that? Especially at that time.
Roberto Clemente,
here's the thing. Yeah. DiMaggio had only played 7 years before he left, and Ted Williams had only played 4. So I'm not sure if they'd be remembered as much if they had died in the service to their country in World War II, because their careers would have been so short. They would have never had a chance to accumulate big numbers. Yeah. Ted Williams would have had his 400 season. That was in 41. DiMaggio would have had his 56-game hitting streak. But a lot of the other accolades that they accomplished, in conjunction with the years after the war. And for Ted Williams, a lot of it really comes after the war, except for the 400 year. Right. So that's an interesting question. I don't think, thank goodness they didn't. I don't think passing away in the war would have enhanced either of their legends. Jack, you're going to make a point about Roberto Clemente.
No, I was going to say Clemente, unfortunately, tragically, is bigger because of his heroic rescue mission and death than had the plane not crashed. Roberto Clemente would be tremendously admired any way you look at it. What he did was what an amazing humanitarian effort, but we want to honor him even more, considering what happened. Getting back to Williams and DiMaggio, that was a controversial MVP vote. In 1941, Williams hits 406, but DiMaggio wins the MVP award. But then again, the Yankees won the pennant that year. So I guess that maybe makes it right. And we might have a controversy this year. Corey Seager is having an amazing year for the Texas Rangers. He's been great. He's hitting in the 330s. He has 32 homers right now, close to 100 RBIs, playing really good defense. He's been the guy. Oh, but Ohtani might get it. And that, to me, is absolutely pathetic if Ohtani gets it, because the Angels have been terrible. They're finishing the year terribly. Ohtani's going out on a whimper this year, basically.
Well, he's injured.
Corey Seager is clearly the MVP this year. The Angels could be. Let me go a step. Let me simplify it, guys. If it wasn't for Corey Seager, the odds are the Rangers would not make the playoffs. Right now, it looks like they have a good chance. They're nip and tuck with Houston and Seattle for that division.
What happens if they don't? What happens if they don't make the playoffs? Is he still your MVP candidate?
Yes, they do, because he's had him in essentially till the end, battling for it. If they don't, Ohtani's team came nowhere close. They could have been just as bad without Ohtani. He hasn't been a difference maker for his team.
Well, I don't agree with that. I think I don't agree with him, but just as bad. The record would have been worse. The record would have been without them, Jack. He won some games pitching for him, hit some home runs. What are you talking about? They would have been just.
It doesn't matter. They well
you're saying they would be just as bad. They wouldn't be just as bad. They would be. They may be without him. They'd be a lot more bad.
Irrelevant. At this time of the year, wouldn't be.
But I'm not disagreeing with you there. I'm just saying you said they would be just as bad without him. No, they would not. They would be worse.
Well, what place are they in that division?
That's not the point.
Place.
I'm not arguing with you about the MVP. I don't think he should be MVP either. But the statement was they would be just as bad without him is not true. They wouldn't be just as bad without him.
I understand.
That's all I'm saying.
Games they would have maybe not won that they won with
maybe
him.
more than
he hasn't been a difference maker for the team.
Well, he has been a difference maker because he's won some games for him, Jack.
No, but he didn't mean for the standings. I mean,
I'm not ready to have the MVP argument yet. I haven't dug into the numbers and all that. Yeah. But if by the season's end, Shohei Ohtani has the best all-around numbers, that means he was the best player in the league, no?
No argument there. It's called most valuable player.
Right, but people have changed the meaning of that award.
I'd be good with it. If you change the name of the award,
but
that's fine. It's most valuable player to his team.
They won't because this keeps them in the news, Jack. They wanted you to.
Did Ernie Banks ever win an MVP?
Guys, the year A-Rod got the MVP with the Texas Rangers, they were last place.
Yes, they do this on purpose.
Nothing to the team.
They do this on purpose. They do this on purpose. Is he most valuable to a team? Is he most valuable to the league? It's supposed to be for the league. They do this on purpose. So we sit here and we argue this thing every year. Who's going to be?
No, they don't. No, I mean they vote sincerely. There's no conspiracy.
No, the award. I'm talking about the award. The award itself is controversial, and they haven't changed it to best player or had two separate awards because then it keeps us doing this.
Well, that's the debate. They should change it to best player award.
Or have two, whatever they want to do. One thing I want to add to, like there are football players that did. Patrick Tillman for the Arizona Cardinals. He went to fight after 9/11 in Afghanistan, was killed by friendly fire. Now, this happens more than people realize. When you're fighting, you're overlapping other troops and planes are bombing areas that you're close to, and it does happen. But this guy was an unbelievable safety. He came out of nowhere. He had an all-pro year going on, and he could have been unbelievably a great NFL player. I don't know how far he would have went. Again, he could have got injured. Anything could have happened. But he at his prime, he also got killed. And you really don't hear about this guy too much anymore. And to me, we think of sports figures as heroes, and this more than just the regular hero, right? This is a guy that actually went when he didn't have to go, joined because of what happened in New York, and then ended up getting tragically killed in friendly fire over there in Afghanistan. So
I hate the term friendly fire, Mac. I never liked that term. I wish there's another term that could come in instead of that. But you always want to remember someone like Pat Tillman, like we're doing on this show. And a non-military thing, we want to remember Joe Delaney. It was, so many years ago, a Kansas City Chief, great running back who lost his life trying to save someone who was drowning, knowing he couldn't swim himself.
Right.
Okay.
And he did save him. He did save people.
And I always remember Joe Delaney, as I do Pat Tillman.
Yeah. Very good.
And that's what makes somebody a hero, right? A hero isn't necessarily someone who's just great at sports. A hero is someone who thinks bigger than themselves and does things to help other people. So great examples from both of you. Another athlete who gave up part of his career in order to serve his country was a great quarterback who graduated from the Naval Academy. And that was in 1964, I believe he was drafted originally. In the 1964 draft, the Dallas Cowboys picked him, and his NFL career doesn't start until 1969, and that quarterback was Roger Staubach. So the great teams at least in the late 60s, of course, in the NFL were the Green Bay Packers. Does history change? Do the Packers win as much as they do if Roger Staubach was the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys?
Yeah, I'm a little older than you guys, so I lived through it. And the answer is they absolutely do, without question at all. I mean, you have to consider the philosophy. Roger Staubach would have come out and been in the NFL in the 66 season. He would have gone to the Cowboys. Coach Tom Landry had a very firm philosophy at that time. It took a quarterback 5 years to develop. In this day and age, at most, they're going to carry the clipboard for 1 year. Staubach would have been on the sidelines for more than 1 year. Even when Staubach started playing for the Cowboys, Coach Landry said, Staubach is different. He could mature in 2 years. The Cowboys had an excellent quarterback at the time, an all-pro quarterback in Don Meredith. He wasn't a liability, Don Meredith. If anything, he was a strength on that team to have. They weren't going to sit Don Meredith down for rookie and Roger Staubach. And if by some chance they did, Coach Landry did, which he wouldn't have done, it would have taken Roger Staubach a year or two to learn things. He wasn't just going to come and light up the league, and he didn't do it once he started playing. He developed quickly, but he wasn't the next Patrick Mahomes in the beginning. I lived through it. Absolutely no way. If Roger Staubach is in for Don Meredith, do they beat the Packers? Because Don Meredith was an all-pro he was a Pro Bowl quarterback, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL.
Jack, he's no Roger Staubach, please. He's not even in Roger Staubach's league. That's not even a close. Roger Staubach came in at 64. He was drafted. So give him 4 years.
No, he played through 65 for the Naval Academy.
I said, suppose he came out in 64 when they drafted him, right? They give him 4 years, that would be 1968. You said he was going to carry a clipboard. I think it would have been a starting quarterback sooner than that. But give him 68. They played the Packers in the championship game. Correct?
66 and 67.
So 68, they went to the playoffs, did they not? Yes.
In 69. In 68, the Jets played the Colts.
69, they went to the playoffs.
Well, in 69, it would have been the Packers weren't relevant anymore.
So
it wouldn't have mattered. The Packers
all right. So say he plays in 3 years. Say he plays in 3 years, Jack, to make you happy. I say he plays.
And he came out when? He came out what year?
He came out in 69. Wait, let me get it.
70, no, what year would Staubach start having played as a rookie?
He came out 70, 71, 69, 70. He came out. And he didn't play until they put him in 1972 when they won halfway through the season when they beat the Dolphins in the Super Bowl, 24-3. So They waited for about, as you said, about 4 years before he played. He replaced Craig Morton at the time. I'm saying he comes out and he plays in 67. How's that? He comes out, he plays in 67. They beat the Packers when Don Meredith, the drive stalled. They beat the Packers. They go on to play the Raiders.
No, that was 66 when the drive stalled.
Say 67.
Who did they play? 67 was the Ice Bowl. The Ice Bowl in Green Bay. No one had any footing.
So Staubach plays in that, and they win that they win that championship. How's that?
Staubach would have been a rookie. The conditions would have been torrid.
I'm just saying he would have played in 3. He would have been a rookie. He would have if he came out in 64, he would have in the league 73 years.
He would have come out of college early, you're saying. Left the Naval Academy early.
Right. He would have left that if the Naval Academy released him or he came out when he was a rookie, he'd been playing in 67.
Yeah, and if LT was born 40 years earlier and he was drafted, what could have been for that team?
I'm just saying he was drafted. We're not talking could have been. He was drafted, Jack. It's not could have been. He was drafted by the Cowboys. So then they go play the Colts. They lose to the Colts. And I think that was with Craig Morton. Staubach plays that game. They beat the Colts.
Right, okay, but that's not the question. I agree with that. I agree in that Super Bowl game. But the question is the Packers' last stand was when they won back-to-back Super Bowls, the first 2 Super Bowls in history, 66, 67. After that, the Packers weren't relevant. Staubach would have taken off. Staubach, I agree with you 100%. They would have beaten the Colts in that Super Bowl had he been the quarterback. But that's not the question. Would they?
And
have
then,
beaten
right.
those
So
Packer
I'm
teams?
saying he plays in 67. He beats the Packers. That's what I'm saying.
He wouldn't have beaten the Packers.
Oh,
at
he
that
would have beat the
stage.
Packers.
He would have been a rookie.
And no, he would have been drafted in 64, Jack. It's 3 years. 64 to 67 is 3 years. He would have played against the Packers, and he would have beat the Packers, I think. And I think he would have made it to the Super Bowl, beat the Jets in the Super
Meredith
Bowl.
played a good game. The
He's
2
no
games
Roger
they lost to the
Staubach.
Packers.
Greg
Listen,
Morton had a great year too,
let me
Jack. They
talk
shut
to-
him down. Greg Morton was a good quarterback. He was an all-pro quarterback too. Roger Staubach is better than Greg Morton.
I'm not talking about Greg Morton. I'm talking about the 2. Let me finish up. The 2 championship games, Super Bowl I and Super Bowl II,
Right.
were won by the Packers. They beat
Right.
the Cowboys in the NFC Championship game.
Right.
Super Bowl I in the NFC Championship game, they beat the Cowboys 34-27 when the Cowboys couldn't quite get it in from the 2-yard line. But Meredith waged a ferocious comeback on the Cowboys' part. Meredith played well for the Cowboys. Quarterback wasn't an issue in that game at all. Staubach, maybe he could have mirrored what Meredith did. Who knows? But the quarterback position, they got excellent play out of it. And then the next year, the conditions were the worst in NFL history. Believe me, Roger Staubach wasn't going to run around. He wasn't going to scramble. No one could keep their footing that day.
You can't say that. He could have ran with the ball. He could have got outside and ran with the ball.
No one was running with the darn ball. No one had any.
They ran, Jack. That is so. You didn't even watch the Super Bowl. They ran the ball most of the game. Both teams ran the ball during that game.
They were slushing forward. No one was able to cut and do anything. The footing was ridiculous. It was like, Doc, it was like having to run a marathon, okay, where you have icy patches the whole way. You know what I mean? You have snow on the ground. You have your share of icy patches. You're going to be slow and very deliberate and very careful because you know you're going to go down continuously if you're not. That's how the conditions were. Mac, those were the worst conditions in NFL history that day. And you'd think Staubach would have run around.
It was. I'll agree with you on one thing there. It was the worst field in history. It wasn't the worst conditions. People have played in worse conditions than that. The field was terrible because it iced over because they ran the water. It broke the.
But wait, Mac, I don't get.
Is the point that if Roger Staubach played, the Cowboys win?
Not they don't beat the Packer teams.
They do.
But is Mac's point that if Roger Staubach plays, the Cowboys win?
Yes.
Max says the Cowboys win, but the Cowboys had one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL at that time in Don Meredith. It wasn't a position where, they needed help in at that point.
They had
Don Meredith.
But Staubach becomes a quarterback. He becomes a Hall of Fame quarterback, of course. But he did go to 4 Super Bowls, and he won. He beat Miami in 1971, 24-3. But then in 1975, he faced Pittsburgh, and he lost.
Right.
And then he beat Denver in 1977. And then in 1978, they played Pittsburgh, and they lost.
That's right.
So it's a tough argument to say that if Roger Staubach plays, the Cowboys are automatically going to win. Because even when he was in his prime and taking teams to the Super Bowl, he didn't always win.
And Vince Lombardi always won. He'd be going against that great Vince Lombardi defense as a rookie, basically.
Well,
okay. Meredith was a seasoned quarterback at that moment.
Meredith was nowhere close to Staubach, Jack. He's not even in the same breath as Roger Staubach.
At that time, I'm talking about.
Well, we could never know because he didn't play during that time. I know at the Naval Academy, I think he won. I think he won the Heisman Trophy.
He did win a Heisman.
I think he brought Navy to unbelievable heights. So I'm not gonna say that he would.
Wait a second. As I recall, when Staubach first came to the Cowboys, didn't it take a couple of years before Tom Landry allowed him to be the starting quarterback?
Yes, I'll give you the numbers. His first year was 1969. He was 27 years old. He played in 6 games. He started 1. In 1970, he played in, I think that says 8 games. He started 3. In 1971, he played in 12 games, or 13 games, starting in 10 of them. And it wasn't really until 1973 that he played all 14 games and started all 14 games. That was his 5th season in the NFL.
But it took him till his 3rd year before he was basically started to become a full-time quarterback. So if he came out early, Coach Landry would have sat him a minimum of 2 years, especially having the quality.
So then he would have been, 3 years would have been 1967. That's what I said. See, what happened was when Staubach came there and after Meredith left,
No. If he came out at the end of the 65, he would have first been a rookie.
Jack, he was drafted in 64. Do I got to keep going over the numbers? 64, 67 would have been 3 years. Don Meredith, when he left, Craig Morton became the starting quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, and he even went to the Super Bowl. And that was the year that was the year they lost to the Colts, if I'm not mistaken. That was
they would have won that game with Staubach. Absolutely.
Right. That was that. Then, there was a controversy between Craig Morton, who was a very good quarterback at the time, and Roger Staubach. So they split time for that year when he started 8 games. The following year, he just gave Staubach the ball, and that's when they beat the Dolphins 24-3. Now, you mentioned he lost to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Doc, there was no team out there that would have lost to the Pittsburgh Steelers during those 2 Super Bowls. And they lost.
Defense was
and they lost
to
the Steel Curtain. I don't know. And Doc, when they lost one of the Super Bowls, Jackie Smith drops the ball in the end zone. That's how they lose the ball. How they lose that game. That's how close the Dallas Cowboys were to the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's how close they were.
All right, so here's just something else. I'm not taking sides here, but I think Jack has the better argument. In 1966, according to the AP, the MVP voting in the NFL, number 1, Bart Starr, number 2, Larry Wilson, number 3, Don Meredith. He was considered one of the top 3 players in the NFL.
Yeah.
But my point is, how much could Staubach? They didn't need much improvement from the quarterback position, especially basically a rookie. If they had a quarterback that was just so, I could see your argument. You take a shot, but Coach Landry wasn't going to play him.
Jack,
regardless of what we think, even if I agree
we keep
with
going
you,
around
Mac,
here. Jack, he wouldn't have been a rookie at 67. We keep going around. He would have been 3rd year. That would have been a 3rd year for Roger Staubach. And again, Don Meredith was a very good quarterback. He is no Roger Staubach. That's not that their names don't even come together.
There's a little wild card thing we haven't mentioned. If he came out when he was drafted, he wouldn't have had that additional time playing in college where he won a Heisman Trophy. So maybe his development wouldn't have been, what it turned out to be. You never know.
Now that's a good point. I think he was a natural athlete. I think he would have been great under Tom Landry. But that's a great point. That's a great point, Jeff.
Yeah, because you even pointed out in today's day and age with quarterbacks, they don't have enough games sometimes in college, and teams, just draft them early. They need that little more seasoning. So we'll never know, the answer to that. We'll never know what would have happened had he played right off the bat,
that was your best point about getting seasoned in college. That was your best point.
If we continue the football conversation, let's look at 2 historic teams, and you guys can now debate to say which one of these 2 teams was the better team. You have the 1977 Oakland Raiders against the 1986 New York Giants. Why doesn't Matt go first this time, and then we'll have Jack respond? Which of those 2 teams would win in a head-to-head debate battle?
Well, of course,
77 Raiders or the Giants of 86?
I'm a big Giant fan, and this was their first Super Bowl. But I'm going to tell you, I think this would have been a heck of a game. You had a 1977 Raider team that was just as physical as the 1986 Giants. You had Ken Stabler, a great a field manager. You had Fred Biletnikoff, arguably one of the best wide receivers in the history of the NFL. You had Cliff Branch on the side. You had Ted Hendricks. You had good offensive lineman Gene Upshaw, and I'm trying to think of the other guy that was there with him. He was a coach, for God's sakes. Let me see.
John Madden.
Art Shell was another offensive lineman. You had Mark Van Egan, tough running back. So I mean, this team was no joke. Ted Hendricks was on the other side of the ball. You had Lester Hayes, who was a monster, a cornerback. These guys this was a very tough team, very, very grind out team, great big personalities. They were the Oakland Raiders. They were the bad boys. Going against the big Blue Wrecking Crew, which may arguably be one of the greatest defenses in the history of football, with their linebacker room, Carson, Taylor, Banks, Reasons. Up front, you had Jim, Burt, Marshall, and Martin. This was an awesome defense. Phil Simms was the MVP quarterback of the 86 Super Bowl with running back Joe Morris, Lionel Manuel, and of course Mark Bavaro. And you put Dave Casper and Mark Bavaro together. I think Dave Casper has an edge over Mark Bavaro. I think that the Raiders have a better wide receiving crew than the Giants had. So I think this would be a heck of a game. I think the Giants would edge it out with Parcells. But you imagine Parcells coaching against Madden. I mean, what a matchup that would have been. That would have been a crazy game. I think it would have been a real tough game. I think Taylor maybe gets a sack and gets a fumble or something like that, and then maybe that's how the Giants win. But it would have been a lot better game than playing the Broncos that year. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a game that could have gone either way. If you let them play a 16-game schedule, each team wins 8 games, the way I look at it. I mean, it's very close. You covered it pretty well in detail, Mac. So for me to start, expanding on what you're saying, I can't expand on it too much. Raiders had a really good offensive line, as you mentioned, Art Shell, Gene Upshaw. I mean, how do you compare Kenny Stabler to Phil Simms? I mean, Phil Simms may have been a tiny bit a better passer, but Stabler ran a little better, was a little more mobile, perhaps. I mean, I like the wideouts a little more with the Raiders. Maybe that gives them an edge with Fred Biletnikoff. The Giants didn't have anyone quite on his level the way I saw it in Cliff Branch. And, of course, the Raider defense had an attitude, about them. Giant defense was great, but something about the Raider defense, they were maybe a little more intimidating. Maybe the Giants were a tiny bit better on defense, but the Raiders were a little more intimidating, where they could maybe make it up that way. I mean, it's a toss-up. Both teams are so evenly matched. But why I'll give the Raiders a tiny edge, you look at their Super Bowl victories. The Giants beat a very ordinary team in the Denver Broncos. Of course, the Broncos had John Elway, but the rest of their team was one of the weakest Super Bowl teams, the way I looked at it, and not a strong one. And they were down 10-9 at the half, the Giants. On the other hand, the Raiders beat the Fran Tarkenton Minnesota Vikings 32-14. They beat them soundly, and the Vikings had a heck of a team, heck of a defense. The Purple People Eaters, the Raiders' offensive line maybe manhandled them that game, and their defense kept Fran Tarkenton in check. So considering the dominance of the Raiders' Super Bowl victory over a quality team in the Vikings, compared to the Giants, who had a great second half when they exploded, I give a tiny edge to the Raiders. But like I said, it's a coin flip either way for the most part.
I think this is the best Super Bowl matchup we had so far. It's the most tightest one we had so far, because these two teams were very, very similar. They're very aggressive, very hard hitting, and their offenses, as Jack says, on defense, I give LT the edge and Carson over their linebackers easily. But their wide receivers over the Giants, that's a pretty easy matchup too. So I think Jack's right. I think it could go either way. It would come down to the last quarter.
Well, would Phil Simms have had the same protection that he had against the Broncos?
That's a good question.
Against the Raider defense. I mean,
and you could say the same thing. You could say the same thing about Ken Stabler versus that Giant defense. That Vikings had nobody like Lawrence Taylor coming from linebacker.
But they had the Vikings had an outstanding pass rush with the Purple
Yeah, I don't know. There's nobody like Lawrence Taylor, Jack.
Well, they had great players, Alan
Yes,
Page,
they
Carl
did.
Ella,
So they did.
yeah,
Leonard
Jim
Marshall.
Marshall, yeah.
Leonard Marshall. I mean, we can match that up. I think the Giants have
Yeah.
a little bit of edge on defense. I think the Raiders have a little bit of edge on offense. So it would have been a good game. It would have been a good game. Definitely.
Yeah, fair enough.
All right, good stuff. Good stuff. I'm not a football expert, so I cannot offer any perspective on that. But earlier, we mentioned the DH. And here's a question. Is the DH a position player? Right? Like how do you classify the DH? Is the designated hitter a position player when you consider baseball positions? What do you think?
No. What position does he play? We grew up with the traditional 9 positions, didn't we? That's what we grew up with. Okay, you have DH. Fine, he's part of the game. He has his role. But the DH isn't a position. I mean, what position?
No, it is a position, right?
He's sitting on the dugout bench. That's his position. He never grabs a glove. He doesn't even have to own a glove a full-time DH.
Yeah, but I mean, when you bring up your lineup, that's on the lineup card, isn't it?
But is he a position? He's part of the game. But
yeah, that's the position. I mean, is there any DHs that are in the Hall of Fame that just played?
Yeah,
almost
Edgar Martinez. Paul Molitor played a lot of his career as DH. He's in the Hall of Fame. David Ortiz. Yep.
Oh, and can a DH come in and play if they want him to? Can he come in and play a position?
If you bring the DH into the game, you lose the position of DH.
Right. So
then the pitchers have to hit. So
right,
it never happens.
Right. So unless you have Shohei Ohtani. So if that's true, if he can DH and then come into and play a position, couldn't you consider that a position?
But then he's not a DH anymore. Once he comes in and will he still be on the box score as a DH if he's playing a position? No, but then he would be called a position play at that point in the game. It would be a switch off if that ever happened.
Right, and you lose your DH for that game.
Yeah, so now he's no longer DH, even though he started the game as a DH.
So
how do you feel basically about the DH rule? Do you just yes or no? Are you happy with the DH or are you against the DH, Mac?
Honestly, I'm against it.
And how about you, Jack?
I'm not only for the DH. I think baseball needs to expand on this. I would like to see the day like they do it the way football does, an offensive and defensive team. Expand the roster by a few players. Have certain guys who are not hitters, your best lineup in the field, and the guys with the bats. I mean, do it that way. How come they can do that in football? They can't do it in baseball?
I'm glad you asked that question, Jack, because football, you're getting hit all the time. That's why they do that. Baseball, you're not getting hit. Why don't we do that on basketball, too? Why don't we call a timeout in basketball and bring in all defense? Let's do it in hockey, too. Why do you want to change baseball so bad?
You can't do it in a sport that there's continuous motion like basketball and hockey. Baseball isn't continuous motion. You put up your defensive team on the field.
That's ridiculous.
You expand the rosters, and some
so
guys.
Then how are you going to consider who's an MVP and who's not? Then, Jack,
where do all these awards go? The MVP is.
How you can decide all these awards at the end of the year if you got a deep? What do you got?
You're not basing the whole game deciding who wins an award.
Well, I mean, they're going to have to go through all that, aren't they?
All right. So let me ask you the question here. Let's say you have to make your choice. You have your offensive team and your defensive team, and this is actually kind of interesting. Then Anthony Volpe is one of the top 10 players in baseball this year defensively, but nobody thought he was going to be a good defensive player. And offensively, he's barely hitting 210. He's hit a bunch of home runs. He's stolen a bunch of bases, but he's barely hitting 210. And if you could only have him for offense or defense, hitting or fielding, based on the fact that he has power, but he hasn't really hit for average, but he has played a solid enough shortstop that he's one of the top defenders in the league. Where would you play him?
No, Doc, before answering that question, I believe a player should be allowed to do both.
No, now you're changing it.
No, I never changed it.
No, you
I
said
think
one
that
off. Wait,
offense
you said
is
just
defense.
like no, you just said one offense and one defense. That's what you said.
No, you're allowed to put out your best defensive team. They don't necessarily have to hit. And Anthony Volpe would absolutely do both for me. He would
Right,
be.
but if you had to
like
choose.
in football, players could play offense and defense. They don't, but they're allowed to.
Jack, that hardly ever happens. That is
But it
so
could.
minuscule. That is so minuscule, Jack. That hardly happens.
People are making a big deal about Deion Sanders now. The kid who just got injured for Colorado, Travis Hunter, he played both sides of the ball.
Right.
Anthony Volpe would have to do both for me.
Right, but you don't get that choice. I'm not giving you that choice.
Jack wants the whole setup for him. He wants to be able to. So we're gonna have an offense and we're gonna have a defense. But if we want to play him on both offense and defense, he sets the perimeters and then he changes it. It's sort of like my.
I never said it that way. I never said either or. I never said that.
But I am saying it. I'm saying that's the new thing. You have your offensive baseball and your defensive baseball. Where would you put the 2023 Anthony Volpe? Would he be in your batting lineup or would he be playing shortstop?
He would be doing both. But if I had to pick one or the other, had to pick one or the other, okay? If this ludicrous thing that at least Matt
brought up,
which I never said either or. No, I didn't. I never said either or.
Nobody said it, but you started this whole thing.
I never said either or, but I will say this: Anthony Volpe would be if I was forced to choose one according to this ludicrous rule that you would try to put up, I would have him be offense. Because of what he does on the bases. He's electrifying on the bases. So it's more than just his average, his bat. So one or the other, I can compensate for his gloves sooner than what I can for what he gives me on the base path.
Mac, where would you play him?
Where would I play him?
Yeah.
You're going to say Aaron Judge. You're going to put him in offense.
Big two-way player. He would play both for me, of course. But if I had to choose one, it obviously would be offense.
Right. Okay. All right. Me, Volpe, I don't know where I'd probably play him at second base. I don't know what I do with Volpe.
It's an interesting thing. Yeah, I'm not in favor of having an offensive and a defensive team in baseball. Me either. I like the DH. I'm a big fan of the DH, but I'm not a big fan of that idea.
No. Most players would do both during a game. But let's say a manager was allowed to have guys that play defense.
We have that already. We have bench players that do that, right?
No, not for the whole game.
Can we put them in?
Bench players could play the whole game. Let's say you have really an outstanding right fielder, any team we're talking about. I'll give you a name, for example. I'll give you a name. Tim LeCastro, who's on the Mets, who used to be a Yankee. Pretty good left fielder.
I seem to remember,
doesn't hit much anymore.
I seem to remember during the 70s, the World Series years of the 70s, some of the Yankees bench players were better than starters on the other teams. And a lot of times they would be playing for a week or so, the bench players. So I think you're saying the same thing that is already happening here. If you have a good defensive first baseman, and you need him, you put him in. I don't see why you have to do a whole team like that.
You could extend careers. Let's say a Jackie Bradley Jr. when he stopped hitting. I think he's out of baseball now. He could probably hang around as a center fielder. He would go from a great to a good center fielder when he declined. He would still be a guy you'd want on your team to just put out there for defense.
I don't know, Jack. I think there's too many players on the team already. So,
you'd have to expand. I would be for expanding the roster, like maybe 5 more players or whatever amount.
Okay.
Interesting. I never really heard that before, and not a big fan. But we'll move on.
You guys are traditionalists. You guys live in the past, kind of. You want to see the World Series games in the day, like
I do want to
Tuesday,
see the World
Wednesday,
Series
Thursday.
games of the day. Didn't
Well,
you
as
guys
opposed to ending late at night. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
decide like if it's a home run, but if it's somebody wearing the jersey of the team on the other team, it's caught, and then it's an out, and the fan can throw the ball back in.
That is the best idea I
That's
ever
the
came
worst
up with.
idea ever.
That's the best.
Yeah.
You get the
That would
fans
be-
involved.
That would be a fun thing. Can you
That would be
imagine?
terrible.
You get the fans.
No,
No,
come
you
on,
get the
Doc.
fans involved.
Doc,
They all
you're
have
sitting,
gloves.
Doc, you're
The
sitting right
fans are
point,
not
Doc.
there to be
Doc, tell me
involved
when, like,
in the
That is
game.
great.
Doc,
The
you're
greatest
sitting in
rule
right
of
field.
all.
You're sitting in right field. All right.
Doc?
And Nevers hits the home run to the right field. You catch it. You throw it to the outfielder. Judge hits him at second. He's out. Wouldn't that be great?
No.
Let me tell you something. Doc is the biggest hypocrite. He's saying how
What? How?
terrible the rule would be. Doc would have his glove in the bleachers.
Yes,
Doc
he
would be with his glove in the bleachers saying, oh, what a terrible rule, trying to catch the opposing team's
He
homer.
would. I know he would.
Yeah, Doc would have his glove. He would
I
show
know.
up with his glove.
And he'd be sitting there waiting
But
for
the
somebody
rule
else.
itself, that doesn't make you a hypocrite if the rule itself is absurd.
Well, you.
If a hockey
but-
puck goes into the seats, does the person who, I guess they get hurt, but who eventually picks up that hockey puck get to go on the ice and start skating? I mean, it just
No,
it
no,
makes no
you're not. You don't go
sense.
on the field, Doc. You're taking it all out of perspective. You throw it to
So
the
then you can
cutoff.
How
you can
about this,
throw
You
the
throw it to the cutoff guy, or you give it to the judge. You throw it back to the judge. Let him throw it in. That's
Wait, how about this? They
Makes
can
no
only
sense.
catch home runs. And if they catch a home run, the batter's not called out. He gets a do-over on the pitch. So the fans get to save something. You know how involved the fans would be in the bleachers?
I mean, this
what it
would
do
be-
for attendance?
Talk
aren't the
about-
fans involved enough?
Doc. No,
No, not to that point. They become part of the game. You know
No,
what it
only
would
Why
problem.
would you want the fans? You're a
only
Major
problem-
League Baseball team, and you go out and you get all of the best players there are, and then you lose the pennant because the fans who come to the game can't catch a pop-up. It
You
makes
want
no
fan
sense.
involvement.
The
He
only
hits a
problem
high
with
fly
that-
ball.
The only
He hits a high
problem
fly
with that-
ball, and the only person underneath it is Granny. And
The only problem.
Granny-
The only
it
problem
doesn't
with
make
that
any
is
sense.
the only problem there is there's an opposing fan next to you. I mean, you
So then
catch the
there's
ball,
a
you go to
fight in
throw
the
it-
stands.
you go to throw it out, and then he tries to stop you. But that you could penalize the home team for that, though.
Well, I'm not talking about throwing out anymore, just catching the ball. And if a fan catches the ball for the home team, he robs the opposition of a homer. Team gives him a $25,000 bonus.
So Mickey
Something
Mantle
like
hits the
that.
ball out of the stadium in Washington, D.C., and there's some person walking across the street, and they catch it. And they happen to be wearing a Washington Senators jersey. So Mantle hits a 536 home run, but he's out.
No, not if it's out of the stadium. No one hits
Jack,
balls
it's
out
got to
of
be in
stadium.
the park. Let's not get crazy.
This is
all right?
that's getting crazy.
Yes.
You would have your glove there, Doc. You would go
I
to
would.
the game. If you're
That is-
someone
that
to
has
go
nothing to do
if
with
you're
whether or not I would
someone
bring
to
my
go to
glove to the
Yankees
game. It has
with
nothing to
you,
do with
and
it.
he
It's the
said, Dad,
silliest rule
let's
I've
sit
ever
in the
heard.
bleachers, you would bring your glove with you if that was
And
That
he'd
has
the rule.
nothing to
And
do
he
with
would
it. It
throw
would
and
ruin the game.
Jack, he would throw it to the cutoff guy too. I don't care what he says. He would throw it to the cutoff man, and he would be part of the
Wait.
team.
We're arguing two different things. If that was a rule, it would be the worst rule they ever invented. But if it was a rule, of course every fan would bring their glove and try to catch the ball. They're
There you
two
go.
separate things. That doesn't make you a
Sold-
hypocrite.
sold out. Every
You'd
park
follow
would-
the rule, and you
every
would do
park.
what you have to do to help your team win. But it's
Every
a terrible rule.
Every park would be sold out. The Oakland A's park would be sold out if that was a rule.
And the game itself would be a mockery because it wouldn't be determined by how many home runs you hit. In fact, you know what would happen is people wouldn't hit home runs anymore. That's the answer.
Well, there you go.
And you'd totally change the game, and you'd have
They
teams
don't-
like
but Doc,
the
they don't always catch
Royals
it. They
and
don't
the
always catch
Cardinals
it.
in the 80s,
They-
and people would
they
be
don't
hitting
al-
in the
Doc, they
gaps
don't
and trying
always
to get
catch
doubles and triples.
They don't always catch them. I mean, it's not like they do it all the time.
It's hard to catch them,
It
yeah.
is hard to catch one of those.
And they have instant replay. It has to be a clean catch on
It's
the
a clean
fly.
catch.
They have instant replay. You know what a guy did the other day? He was holding his baby, in his arms, and he caught it with one hand.
Now
Oh,
that
right.
should
Now
be an
babies going to be dropped all over the stadium. So that they try to let
that,
you take
listen,
win.
now I agree with Jack there. That if you catch the ball with a baby in your hands, I mean that should be an out. That should be an out.
You guys, I've never understood the fascination with that rule. It makes no sense.
You want to get
so
fan
to
involvement.
close the argument,
Yes,
the DH isn't a position.
right.
But if you're
No.
a fan who pays money and you're sitting in the upper deck and a ball comes at you and you catch it, the guy is out, and that's now a position.
No, I would have a rule. You are not allowed to catch a home run for an out in the first row. We don't want anyone falling off the upper
Right.
deck. You can't
So what if you're in
have
the upper
that.
deck in the 7th row?
That's fine. Second
Your
row
position
on.
is
The
left
first row,
mezzanine.
it doesn't count.
Yes.
What position do you play on the Yankees? Left mezzanine. Yes.
Left
I'm second loge.
Wait. What
This
about
makes
this
no
idea,
sense.
guys? Okay, what about this idea? The guys who are not playing on the bench allowed to sit in the bleachers, the official guys on the team, and the ball happens to be hit there and they catch it, it's an out. Rather
So if you
than
hit it
just
into the
sitting in the
bullpen,
dugout.
and you hit into the opposite team's bullpen, and the bullpen guy catches it, you're out.
I'm not sure about the bullpen area. I haven't sorted
Why does that
out.
not count?
Yeah,
Why-
maybe.
What's the difference?
Can you imagine if one guy in the bullpen, he's always looking in case the ball's hit? I don't know how I feel about the bullpen.
So what if it's the coach in the bullpen?
No, he's not a player.
But the fan is.
Yes.
This makes no
We're just
sense.
Doc, we're just trying to get the fan involvement in baseball.
You don't
Every
need
park-
the fans to be
Every park
involved
would
at
be
that level.
even. I'm saying Oakland would be sold out. Pittsburgh would be
Oakland-
sold out. They would all
You
be
know what
sold out.
Oakland's attendance? Oakland has been drawing about 4,000 people a game.
Right.
It's been awful there. Okay, they're going to be moving to Las Vegas, and obviously they've thrown in the towel with 4,000 per game. They have an awful team, granted, but sometimes you need gimmicks to get more people out there. If the A's could get 20,000 instead of 4,000, as ludicrous as rules are, I mean, that's the name of the game. You want people to come out to the ballpark.
So if the movie industry starts to tank, what you could then do is just say, we're going to let anybody be in the movie with the actors, right? Because this way it'll get more people involved and interested.
Well,
Or on a Broadway
concepts.
play. This Broadway play is about to close. Well, we'd get more people in if we just pulled people out of the audience and had them sing. That would really work.
Entertainers do that sometimes. They bring someone out of the audience, onto the stage.
That's absurd.
I mean, it's
Oh, you guys. Well, you know what? That
no,
takes us
they
to the
never
top
get
of the
to
hour.
bat. They never get to bat because
Yeah,
everyone's
there
catching
is-
the ball. They
there
couldn't
is
hit a
limitations.
major league.
There's definitely limitations. Definitely.
Worst
So-
idea.
Mac has this one. Mac and myself are fully in accord with this.
Yes, you guys are in at least. Well, I did one thing then. I will give myself a lot of credit today. You guys disagreed about everything, but I found the thing you agreed on. And that
Yes.
brings us to the top of the hour. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching the Mac and Jack and Dr. Sem debate show. We missed Pags today. Hope we see him next week. You won't see me next week. I'll be back in 2 weeks. Have a great and wonderful Saturday.
The Big Football Show tomorrow, folks, 8 to 10. Be there. One of the best shows on the net. And have a